August 20, 1786. Charles Alexandre de Calonne, the Controller General of Finances, carries a heavy leather portfolio through the gilded corridors of Versailles. He bypasses the usual crowd of courtiers and sycophants. He walks directly to the private apartments of King Louis XVI. Calonne finds the monarch not on the throne, but in his personal workshop, quietly filing a brass tumbler for a new lock mechanism. The minister drops the portfolio on a side table. He delivers a terminal diagnosis to the sovereign. The richest nation in Europe is entirely broke. The state is not just short on cash. It is structurally insolvent. Everyone thinks the French Revolution began at the Bastille with a starving mob and radical Enlightenment ideals, and a frivolous queen draped in diamonds. That story is the smoke. This video follows the fire. The true origin of the French Revolution, what historians get wrong time and time again, is that the collapse did not begin with the hungry poor at the gates. It began with the elite. It began with a ledger. France did not fall because it lost a war. It fell because it won one and could not figure out how to pay for it. Rewind the clock to 1778. The American War of Independence is raging across the Atlantic. France sees a golden opportunity to humiliate Britain after the disastrous 7 Years' War. The French crown sends fleets, soldiers, and massive amounts of capital to George Washington, but military glory is fiercely expensive. The American intervention cost the French treasury over 1 billion livres. That figure represents more than twice the nation's entire annual revenue. And when the British surrender at Yorktown, there is no gold coming back across the ocean to cover the expenditure. Just debt. Cold, compounding, permanent debt. To fund this geopolitical revenge, the crown turns to a Swiss banker named Jacques Necker. Necker is a financial celebrity, a man who understands market psychology far better than traditional statecraft. He knows the king cannot raise taxes on the peasantry without sparking an immediate revolt. So Necker borrows. He borrows at ruinous interest rates, sometimes reaching as high as 10 or 12%. He raises funds by selling life annuities to sophisticated investors in Geneva, Amsterdam, and Paris. As economic historian Thomas Sargent points out, Necker creates a massive and opaque borrowing mechanism with absolutely no central bank to manage the liquidity. Necker funds the American war by issuing debt tied to the lifespans of young girls in Geneva, a financial derivative scheme that locks the French state into paying massive dividends for decades. He knows this borrowing pace is completely unsustainable. So in 1781, Necker does something historically unprecedented. He publishes the royal budget for the public to read. It is called the Compte Rendu au Roi. It is printed in the thousands and debated in coffee houses across Europe. In this document, Necker claims the French state is running a 10 million livre surplus. It is a brilliant piece of public relations. It is also a complete accounting fabrication. Necker simply omits the extraordinary American war expenses from the balance sheet entirely. He moves the toxic debt off the books. This accounting illusion is widely celebrated as a masterpiece of fiscal management, but it quietly rots the monarchy's credit from within. Investors keep buying French bonds, completely believing the surplus is real. When Necker is eventually ousted from power, his successors inherit a ticking sovereign time bomb. The crown finds itself borrowing capital, simply to pay the interest on previous loans. It functions as a sovereign Ponzi scheme. By the time Calonne opens his leather portfolio in that royal workshop in 1786, the illusion has completely shattered. The deficit is entirely unmanageable. The state needs hard currency, and it needs it immediately. But where is the money going to come from? France is the wealthiest country on the European continent, but its vast wealth is locked behind an impenetrable fortress of legal privilege. This brings us to the actual mechanism of the collapse. The tax system in pre-revolutionary France is not merely unfair. It is a structurally impossible machine engineered by the powerful to exclusively spare the powerful. If you are a noble or a high-ranking member of the Catholic clergy, you are effectively immune to direct taxation. The elite view their tax exemption not as a bureaucratic loophole, but as a sacred right, a defining mark of their ancient bloodline and social superiority. They absolutely do not pay the taille, the primary land tax of the era. That crushing burden falls entirely on the rural peasantry. Furthermore, to collect its revenues, the crown does not use official government agents. It outsources the entire operation to a private corporate syndicate known as the Farmers General. These are ruthless corporate tax farmers who pay the king a massive lump sum up front for the exclusive right to collect taxes, keeping whatever extra profit they can physically squeeze from the civilian population. To stop smuggling, they even build a massive physical wall around the entire city of Paris. Their most hated instrument of extraction is the gabelle, a mandatory state tax on salt. Salt is not a luxury item in the 18th century. It is a biological necessity. It is the only reliable way to preserve meat and survive the winter. The farmers general force every single citizen over the age of 8 to purchase a minimum amount of heavily taxed, state-sanctioned salt every single year. If you attempt to buy cheaper smuggled salt, the tax inspectors, who operate as heavily armed corporate thugs, possess the legal authority to search your home, seize your property, or send you to die in the naval galleys. The system is brutally efficient at extracting wealth from those who have absolutely nothing, but it leaves the vast, sprawling fortunes of the aristocracy completely untouched. Calonne looks at the royal ledgers. He looks at the compounding debt. He realizes the crown has reached the absolute physical limit of what it can squeeze from the working poor. You cannot tax a stone. The only mathematical way to save the nation from total default is to tax the rich. Calonne proposes a radical, universal land tax with absolutely no exemptions. No exceptions for wealthy dukes. No exceptions for powerful bishops. Every single person pays a percentage based on the exact land they own. It is a desperate, totally necessary reform. But Calonne knows the Paris Parlement, a conservative judicial body entirely controlled by the nobility, will never register this new tax law. So he attempts a massive, unprecedented political gamble. He convinces King Louis XVI to summon the Assembly of Notables in February 1787. This is exactly where the standard historical narrative fractures. The part almost everyone gets wrong is who actually launched the physical resistance against the state. The first active rebels against Louis XVI were not the hungry, poor gathering at the gates of Versailles. They were the aristocracy. The notables are a hand-picked group of 144 men, mostly princes, dukes, and high-ranking clerics. Calonne assumes they will recognize the existential, systemic threat to the state and agree to his reforms simply to save their own skins and preserve the monarchy. He is disastrously wrong. When Calonne presents the true, terrifying financial state of the kingdom, the notables refuse to believe him. They point directly to Necker's published budget from 6 years earlier. They demand to see the real ledgers. They violently accuse Calonne of sheer incompetence, of state embezzlement, and of attempting to systematically destroy the ancient sacred rights of the French nobility. The aristocracy defends their tax exemptions so fiercely, so completely, that they force the very institutional collapse that will eventually take their own heads. They dig their heels in. They officially declare that only a full gathering of the Estates General can legally approve any new taxes. They force the politically weak king to fire Calonne. They force the minister into immediate exile. The nobility has effectively shut down the absolute government rather than pay their fair mathematical share. They have permanently broken the absolute authority of the Bourbon monarchy. As historian William Doyle argues, this aristocratic revolt is the true, undeniable spark of the French Revolution. The elite proactively dismantle the king's power to enforce financial policy, leaving a massive power vacuum at the exact historical moment the state runs completely out of cash. The crown is forced to officially suspend payments on its sovereign debts in August 1788. The richest, most culturally dominant nation in Europe is officially bankrupt. The Paris stock market plummets. Public and international confidence is instantly destroyed. But a fiscal crisis operating alone at the top of society does not burn down an entire nation. It merely stacks the dry kindling. It takes a visceral, physical crisis to strike the match. And that physical crisis arrives directly from the sky. While the wealthy aristocrats are busy arguing over abstract ledgers in their gilded halls, the global weather patterns are violently shifting. The summer of 1788 brings a devastating, relentless drought across the continent, followed by a freak, catastrophic hailstorm on July 13 that drops hailstones the size of human fists, destroying massive swathes of ripe grain across northern France. The autumn harvest fails completely. Now, the structural, financial failure of the government directly collides with a stark biological imperative. Human beings need to eat. The open market price of grain begins to climb. Then it aggressively accelerates. By the spring of 1789, a single standard loaf of bread cost nearly a full day's wage for an average urban manual worker. Let that grim economic reality sink in for a moment. Imagine spending 88% of your daily income just to secure enough basic calories to survive until tomorrow morning. There is absolutely no money left for rent. There is no money left for clothing or heating fuel. There is only bread and escalating anger. The working classes in the alleys of Paris and the starving peasants in the rural countryside are watching their children physically waste away. At the exact same time, the king, completely out of political options and desperate for hard cash, finally caves to the stubborn nobility's demands. He summons the Estates General to formally meet in May 1789. The Estates General has not been called to assemble in over a century and a half. It is a desperate, flailing move, a total capitulation of royal authority. The king honestly thinks he is simply calling a temporary advisory council to fix his broken budget. He does not realize he has just called a hostile constituent assembly that will completely dismantle his entire world. When the elected delegates finally arrive at Versailles, the Third Estate, representing the vast majority of the common people, realizes almost immediately that the voting system is completely rigged against them. The clergy and the nobility, comprising the First and Second Estates, hold 2/3 of the legislative voting power despite representing less than 3% of the actual French population. The Third Estate demands a fair, head-count vote. The king clumsily locks them out of their designated meeting hall. In response, they gather on an indoor royal tennis court and swear a solemn, historic oath not to disband until they have written an entirely new constitution for France. The abstract fiscal crisis at the top has now fully and violently merged with the starvation crisis at the bottom. The panicked king orders thousands of heavily armed mercenary troops to surround the city of Paris. The common people, terrified that the foreign soldiers are coming to hoard the remaining scarce grain and slaughter the civilian populace, frantically search for weapons. They break into the military hospital of the Invalides, successfully seizing over 30,000 muskets. But they desperately need gunpowder to make those weapons function. The city's gunpowder supply is securely stored in a massive, looming medieval fortress on the eastern edge of the city, the Bastille. The infamous storming of the Bastille on July 14 is not born of high-minded Enlightenment philosophy or democratic idealism. It is a desperate, kinetic action driven by primal fear, severe hunger, and a total, undeniable collapse of centralized state authority. The people are not looking for abstract liberty that morning. They are looking for physical ammunition to defend their families against a bankrupt government that has entirely lost its monopoly on violence. The violence rapidly escalates. Terminal outcomes become the new, brutal currency of political discourse on the streets. The severed heads of state officials and the prison governor Delaunay are paraded on iron pikes. The aristocracy, the very same elite people who started the entire rebellion 2 years earlier by stubbornly refusing to pay a basic land tax, suddenly realize they have completely lost control of the political monster they intentionally unleashed. Many panic and flee the country, becoming émigrés. Others stubbornly stay and eventually face the cold steel of the guillotine. The bureaucratic machine of the state aggressively turns on its former masters. The revolution they initiated to greedily protect their wealth ends up confiscating absolutely all of it. The true, documented origin of the French Revolution is a story about compounding debt, entrenched privilege, and a ruling class that consciously chose to burn down its own kingdom rather than pay its fair mathematical share. It is not just a romanticized story of angry, starving peasants. It is a terrifying historical case study in sovereign insolvency. When historians point merely to the Reign of Terror and the bloody barricades, they are pointing only to the late-stage symptoms. The terminal disease was initially contracted in the falsified ledgers of Jacques Necker and the stubborn, suicidal pride of the Assembly of Notables. The American War of Independence broke the French treasury, but the French elite broke the French state. They conclusively proved that when a deeply unequal society faces a massive economic shock, the absolute refusal of the wealthy to absorb their fair share of the financial pain will inevitably destroy the very legal institutions that protect their massive wealth. The ancient system did not fail simply because it was poor. It failed because it was rigidly inflexible. It failed because the vital mechanism of reform was entirely controlled by the exact same people who financially benefited from the systemic corruption. And as we look at massive sovereign debts today across the globe, at elite offshore tax avoidance, at compounding national deficits, and at angry populations struggling with the rapidly rising cost of basic necessities, the dusty ledgers of 1788 sound unsettlingly familiar. The math always catches up in the end. Debt is not just a theoretical number on a page. It is a physical historical force. It bends complex societies until they finally snap. This is how powerful empires actually collapse. Not with a sudden, overwhelming foreign invasion, but with a quiet accounting error, a single missed harvest, and a sudden, terrifying realization that the people in charge have absolutely no idea how to fix the broken machine. If you want to deeply understand how modern economies currently face these exact same systemic traps, and how you can spot the hidden warning signs in our current global financial system, you need to see exactly how this story continues. Hit the subscribe button right now to join us for our next intelligence briefing, where we meticulously track how the desperate revolutionary government tried to magically solve this exact same debt crisis by mass printing unbacked paper money, triggering one of the most catastrophic and highly destructive hyperinflation events in human history.